Welcome to Scaling Impact, where we decode how entrepreneurs are harnessing the power of the UN Sustainable Development Goals to create remarkable and impactful businesses that drive transformation on a global and local human scale. We explore how sustainability is elevating our human consciousness and catalyzing us to create within constraints. We decipher why now is the biggest entrepreneurial opportunity since the dawn of industrialization and what leaders and entrepreneurs can do to harness the winds of change. I'm Anders Nilsson, global futurist, EO Sydney Impact Champion and father, and your co-host with Lisa Andrews for Scaling Impact.
Welcome, Lucinda Mills, to be talking to us today about SDG number 3 on good health and well-being. I would love to hear from you why you're passionate about this topic.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I am passionate about health and well-being. It's my business. I stumbled into being an entrepreneur. I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur. I think of myself as a yogi and a Pilates teacher who accidentally ended up having a business. And at the core of yoga and Pilates is a philosophy that we are the architects of our own well-being.
That's brilliant. And what does well-being mean to you?
It's become a fuzzy word, hasn't it? And ultimately, yoga and Pilates take a fairly lofty ideal as to what human potential is and how most of us should be feeling within ourselves and how we should be acting towards others in the world. So to take well-being from a yogic approach and to a lesser extent Pilates, there really is a vision of the individual as being somebody who is quite limitless, deeply compassionate, and hugely resilient. And I think that as much as there's been a shift from the idea of treating illness, of treating pathology as being the central tenet of healthcare towards the idea of actively promoting health, yoga and Pilates are almost a step ahead of that into the slightly more lofty and also the slightly more vague ideas of, human potential.
I love the term human potential. That really excites me. Can you share a little bit about your background and what are some of those key moments in life that have gotten you to where you are today?
I'd love to. I was a bit of a dreamer as a kid, and I've recently, as many people have, had a diagnosis of ADHD, which was clearly missed as a child, and that gives me a different framework to think about how I was as a child. But I was very much a dreamer. I was always interested in art, literature, philosophy, spirituality. I did fine art at university. I went into music production and writing, and then eventually stumbled into a yoga class, and it was that hallelujah moment for me. I didn't have a moment of thinking, this is going to be a business. It was just a feeling of coming home and a feeling of things making sense at last, and all of the disparate elements that I had always loved coming together in this one modality. It's got embodiment, it's got music, it's got spirituality, it's got philosophy, it's got creativity. It was all of these different elements that I loved rolled into one magical experience. Excuse me. And from that moment on, I've been involved in teaching, practicing, learning about yoga. I opened One Hot Yoga and Pilates in 2012 in South Yarra. We then basically expanded a studio every year, and I would have a baby every second year. So I've now got 3 babies, 2 locations, but the offering has expanded a lot. We added Reformer Pilates, we've added Mat Pilates, and most recently we've extended the Pilates offering to include Studio Pilates. So 2 locations in Sydney and Melbourne, and a much bigger offering than where I started.
You've got me really intrigued when you talk about limitless and then also human potential. So what does limitless mean?
I think that the way I understand it currently, and that's important to me, that it's what I understand currently, because we're always learning, we're always changing. So inevitably I'd look back on this in 5 years and think that wasn't it at all. But it's best defined as its opposite. And I think we encounter the limits of our belief, of the stories that we tell ourselves, of the conditioning of our bodies frequently, and to more extent than we realize. So I think that we get in our own way so much. And exploring human potential and becoming limitless is about gradually getting rid of those blocks that we're putting in our way, so that we can start to express ourselves without fear, without comparison, without the lesser and meaner parts of ourselves.
It's interesting that you talk a lot about mindset, and I think that's such an important thing when we're talking about good health and well-being, that we all do have that certain mindset. And it's really cool to hear about the studios that you have. Do you notice a mindset shift with people from when they've started and attended your community and been a part of what you do?
Absolutely. Every time. Huge changes. And what's interesting as a yoga teacher is the way people's psychology is very much expressed through their movement. And it would probably make people more fearful of going to a yoga class. People are already kind of intimidated about it. But if you knew how much your psychology is on display in a yoga class with how you move and how you conduct yourself, I think people would be terrified. But yoga is the idea that movement is embodied thought. And it's embodied emotion. And so when you're working with the body, you're working with your emotion, your thought patterns, but in a completely different way. It's not a cognitive process, and yet you're still working with those patterns. And it's very much a virtuous circle that if you change your body, you change your mind. If you change your mind, you change your environment. If you change your environment, you change your body. Like, all of these things work together. And you start to see those things just in ways people carry themselves, in what they dress, in how they start to approach their fellow students. And sometimes they can articulate it and be aware of it, and other times they're not. They just know that they have to keep coming.
It's interesting. And I guess for our listeners today, and we're talking about SDG number 3, and the United Nations SDG goals really are around huge, big world problems. And some of the challenges on that list is child mortality rates, and there's a whole heap of disease and sickness, and going through COVID in developing nations, it's been really challenging. And so I guess what I'd love to explore, and I'm excited to talk to you about today, is how we each scale our own impact and the difference that we can make. And so when you start to talk about our own physiology and our own psychology, sometimes some of these really huge challenges are quite overwhelming for people to be able to think about how they can make a difference. And I'm just going to stack on this question a little bit for you, so follow me for a moment. I thought a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and how we almost need to have our own base needs met to show up for ourselves, and then we show up for our immediate family, our extended family and friends, our local community, our country, the world, and all the rest. So I'm seeing the correlation with good health and well-being and those big challenges, and that we actually all, as entrepreneurs, and even not entrepreneurs, as humans, we all have an impact and a ripple effect on those around us. And so how does human potential relate in that way? And what do you think on a global perspective around the difference we can make?
I'd love you to tell me the answers to those questions, Lisa.
That was a big question.
I think it's something that I'm certainly struggling with at the moment a lot in trying to figure out what should I be doing right now. Because if you look at those sustainability goals, they're very humbling. My business does not address the urgency and the humanity of those goals. And as you say, it's very much Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that there are huge amounts of people in the world who are not having basic needs of safety and well-being met. And that can feel really overwhelming. And I think when you're in a space like I am, which is very much at the top of that hierarchy of needs, it's very much dealing with people who already have all those basic needs met, and we're kind of sitting around going, but I want more. That's almost shameful that we're kind of sitting here going, I want more, I'm still not happy enough, I want more. And yet I think that it is a really important function that things like yoga and Pilates perform, and that each of us need to perform. And part of that is first and foremost, like you said, the fact that we have a ripple effect. And what I notice increasingly is how in that immediate way, in terms of our own little tiny ecosystem of self, we make ourselves kind of miserable, and how that then spreads outwards, and people can be living in, you and I live in one of the most magnificent cities in the world, and, it really is paradise, and we're all so fortunate, and people will create the most ridiculous conflict over nothing. And I think that's tragic for two reasons. One, it's like, well, we're having a miserable time if we're engaged in some futile conflict with somebody. But two, it means that there's no energy for us to be looking into solving the problems of the rest of the world and of the environment. And to that extent, yoga and Pilates are really powerful, because it's much more than just like going for a jog or lifting weights and keeping your body at a reasonable level of function. It really is making sure that you are aligned with that vision of humanity that is kind and compassionate and capable of solving these problems. So my little saying that I have to myself when I have doubts about what I'm doing is, I don't know how to solve the world's problems. There is no way that I'm one of those super clever people. I don't know how much most things work even. But I do know that yoga and Pilates can help every single person who comes through the door to be more centered, to be more clear, to get themselves out of those petty interactions that bring them down, and to move them into a space where they can be contributing to the world to their full potential. And there's a beautiful image that very simply describes what I think we do, which is that line of matches, and someone lights the match at the end and the flame keeps going across, and it just takes one match to drop out to not keep that flame going. And that's what I think this kind of self-imposed unhappiness is like. And when people start to free themselves of it, they become that little break in the chain that allows us to start doing more, being more. So I don't know how to solve these problems, but I'm pretty sure other people do. And those other people need to be using these skills so that they can be using the gifts that they've been given to solve those problems.
I really love your approach to the answer. And I think we're talking about, like you say, we live a very privileged life when you have the contrast of how others in the world are living, and recognizing and appreciating that. And I guess, that's where gratitude comes in. And I've had health challenges myself. I've had 2 kidney transplants, and there was one day where I was just so unwell, and I remember just feeling absolutely the worst I've ever felt. And I was getting in the lift to come back up to my apartment, and I was almost just saying, okay, I'm grateful that I live in a really nice apartment. I'm grateful today that there's running water from the tap. And it's like you almost go from this high level of I'm grateful for all these amazing things to hang on a second, I'm grateful for base needs. And I think it's that practice of gratitude. You mentioned about energy, and it's actually my word of the year this year. And so for our listeners, one of the things and the actions that I actually did, and we're all about actions here, was for every interaction that I have with any human is, did they leave the conversation with me with more positive energy or less positive energy? And so how are you actually creating a ripple effect out to the world? And so I think that really resonates. And it is overwhelming when you think about all of these world challenges. You've actually brought up a whole heap of questions for me that I have about your business that I know that you're not going to be able to answer, but I just think maybe some of our listeners might ask it for their own businesses as well. And so my first question was, how much information do you know about all the members that actually come to your studios and the impact and the ripple effect of impact that they're having? And I know businesses have CRM systems, but we actually had a mission of how could we impact 1 billion people? And we thought, okay, well, if we have X amount of clients with X amount of employees that have X amount of clients within their businesses as well, then, can we actually have a far enough reach with our education programs or what we do? So asking ourselves and the action to know more about your clients. And I know we've all got CRMs. So how do you find out the ripple effect they're having? How many family members do they have? And what's their interactions with you? And so this is a little bit going into the technology, and I'll try not to be too creepy. We actually did a project with a big real estate company, and we were looking at, do their buildings make people happier or sadder when they've been attending? So let's say, for example, you're going into the office and you have visual recognition cameras that are actually measuring people's smile and their happiness and their posture as they're walking into the building. And then at the end of the day, let's say it's 9 till 5 p.m., they're walking out of the building. They then a little bit more slumped over. Are they feeling energized? And what is the impact of your business or your workplace on your employees, your clients, your customers? And then how do we start to create some of this information? And I always love to say big data, big insights, big action. And how do you turn some of those insights into action? And I almost could assume that when people walk into your business that they're going to walk out feeling a lot better and re-energized because they've had this experience where they've done something for themselves. Is that something that you think about in your business?
We think about the impact that we have on our client. I don't think that we have delved into the impact our clients then have on the world. But I really love that idea as a way to scale impact. And I think that's brilliant. And you've got me thinking.
Yeah, and people are so inspired by stories as well. And so, knowing who your clients are and knowing what they're actually doing. We talk about impact and making a difference and doing good things in the world. And I think it's been primarily in the past philanthropic or something on a side of business, not actually embracing or knowing that you're just doing good, almost the transition to profit with purpose now. And if people aren't actually aligning with purpose or doing good things in the world, I think it's a competitive advantage now. However, in 5 years' time, it's going to be a disadvantage if people aren't doing good things. And so sharing some of those stories can really inspire people to want the kind of energy that other people have. So how do we expand that ripple effect? And, when we look at good health and well-being, is it that we have contrast in our workplace and we share stories from overseas? Is it that we actually encourage our employees to think about some world problems that we might be able to solve? And I guess understanding where we're at ourselves and when we need to take that time out in the hierarchy of needs. But when we're self-actualizing, then, how much can we then get momentum with other people and create a bigger impact for that? I think is the question that I keep asking.
You're asking somebody who, I struggle to get things done at the best of times. So I think the best time was yesterday, and, the second best time is today, right? I think increasingly businesses are considering the idea of community a lot more, which is a way of thinking about what you're talking about, I think, which is expanding our interaction and our impact beyond a commercial interaction. And I'm quite new to thinking about that in my own way in the business. But anecdotally, both in my personal and professional life, I'm always surprised how far your impact goes, how you can meet people who are kind of 5 people removed from you, and somehow the story comes back about how you've had an impact, whether it's somebody who, I've met people who've said, oh, you own that yoga studio. A friend of mine used to go to your yoga studio. She was such a bitch before she went. And then she started going, and now she is so lovely. She's so calm. Thank God for your studio. And so I think it gets back to you in unexpected ways. But I guess turning each person into an advocate for good would be the ultimate aim.
I'm actually thinking about, well, I probably need to come and see you sometimes as well and get into the studio. How do we recognize and I guess appreciate that a lot of us have been cooped up, we're working from home, we're under a lot of stress and pressure, and over the last few years there's been a lot more mental health challenges, whether it be as business owners or from our staff. We're dealing with a lot more change these days. So what's your advice for someone who might not be feeling 100% and might not want to go and do something good for themselves?
I find social media really fascinating for diagnosing trends in our society. And often it's through seeing somebody else work through something on social media that then I start to recognize that I'm feeling that as well. And I went through that whole experience with burnout, and that burnout's now something that's really trending. And it does seem to be that we're experiencing a kind of collective burnout from the immediate stresses of COVID and how everybody had to make significant changes to cope with it and how impactful it was. And now we're kind of dribbling out the other end, and life's kind of coming back to some sort of normality, but not really. And there's a lot of people still feeling a kind of agoraphobia, like an unwillingness to re-engage, and that this is a kind of burnout from what we've been experiencing. And I have definitely been experiencing it. To some extent, it's good. It's like, oh, I've thrown out all of my kind of formal pants. So now I'm just in stretchy pants. But, a lot of it is also a limit. And I guess that comes back to, is it a choice that you're making from a true position of power, or is it a limitation of your fear and discomfort? And I started to notice that I was behaving in ways that were limited. And with any change in activity, it's that first step that is difficult, and then making that first step every day. And what we do in the studio a lot is try to get people to break through that discomfort of something new as quickly as possible by coming as frequently as possible at first. So I think that there's huge value in throwing yourself wholeheartedly into something, because then you get this positive reinforcement and it creates its own momentum. So doing a little bit every day is often what's recommended for long-term behavior change. But I think when you're looking at a big change, what has worked for me in the past is go all in. Do it every day. Do it twice a day. Buy the new outfit. Like, kit yourself out. Change everything in your life around this new thing. Dive into it. And then come like day 20, when you start to then the resistance starts coming back in, you'll be buoyed along by how much you've changed in such a short period of time. It gives you confidence, it gives you optimism, and then you can start employing those behavioral change principles of just do a little bit. Just do a little bit every day so that you keep the pattern.
You're reminding me of the word activation energy. And I learned about this about 5 or 6 years ago, and that we've got a budget of activation energy every day. And if you think about, most of us have energy all the time, but to activate, to do something different, like you're talking about, you've almost got to consciously decide to have an activation energy budget. And then I'm almost stacking on, I love atomic habits. And how do you actually set that feedback loop? And is it that you just need to put the shoes next to your bed in the morning, so you get out of bed, you see them there, and then you remember your activation energy budget, you put them on, and then you embed that persona for the day. And it's really interesting. I think even just looping back to what you were saying about the psychology and how it lives in our body. I heard a great story about a wild bird being caged, and how when it happens in the wild and you take a wild bird and you put it into a cage, after a while you can leave the hinge open and the door open, but the wild bird doesn't fly out of the cage. And I think there's a similar analogy with what's happened with COVID, of people just not getting out so much, or just being a new difference. So I'm kind of hearing that, and I guess it's then how do actually people get the motivation to do that? And is it that there are big world challenges that need solving, and that we are quite privileged and have that contrast to be able to go, hey, I am a little bit lucky and I can do something? And, what will motivate each individual person? So I guess that is probably my question is, what is it that would give you purpose and passion to really want to show up for yourself so you can show up for others and show up for more people? Is that something that resonates with you and that you see happen?
I experienced it quite profoundly when I had gestational diabetes. I had never successfully gone on a diet in my life. I had tried several times, but just ultimately the long-term goal never outweighed the tastiness of something. And when I had gestational diabetes, initially it was managed through diet. I was lucky enough to go on a trial program, so I had so much support through it with a dietitian. And it's quite a strict diet, and then you measure your blood immediately after, and you're getting this constant feedback about how your actions are actually meeting your goals, whether what you're eating is keeping your blood sugar down, with the ultimate aim of protecting your growing baby. And it was the first time in my life I ever stuck to a diet, and it was effortless. I did not expend any energy debating with myself whether I wanted to do it, whether it was worth it. I knew it was worth it because it was for someone else. It was for my child. And it was such a profound experience because I realized that you can really do anything. I know that's such a cliche, but it's like there's so much that you can achieve if you think it's worth it. And so I think people need to be very honest with themselves about what their goals really are. And particularly in the wellness space, I think there's, people write a lot of lists about, I'm going to give up alcohol, or the big one in yoga for some reason was always coffee. Every time I went on a yoga retreat or a training, they were always like, you've got to give up coffee, got to give up coffee. And it was always so hard for me. And it was because it's like, why do I have to give up coffee? I just don't believe it's that bad for me. But I think if you can connect to a purpose that you really believe in, then the actions become so much easier. I don't think it's ever going to be as easy and clear as it was for that point in time for me in my life, because it was also like, well, it's over in 6 months, so I can go back to eating whatever I want. And that's what happened. But it was a really profound experience for me in shifting how I thought about purpose.
I love that we've gone into the medical and the health side of things. And so I've shared I've had 2 kidney transplants, and I actually had an experience today where I went for a blood test and I don't have great veins, so I had to have 3 attempts of a needle. And I keep asking myself all these different questions around good health and what it means. And, for me, non-invasive ways of being able to measure your health would be incredible. And so I love Dr. Naveen Jain, and he's the founder of Viome, and they do the microbiome and the gut intelligence tests, and how history has actually been so blanketed. So like you say, everyone should stop drinking coffee. Well, actually, that's the old way of doing things, where it's saying that coffee's bad for everybody. Well, how do you know that? Is that true? And I think we're going through this phase now with data science and the ability to know ourselves a lot better to be able to make conscious choices. And so I've just done the Viome test, and it comes back and it tells you what are superfoods for you, what should you eat, what shouldn't you eat, what should you only eat sometimes. And I think that individualized health advice is just so much more modern of, how we can actually show up for ourselves. And so when we talk about diet, absolutely. But I imagine in the future that we have a healthcare system, not a sick care system like we currently have. And so this non-invasive way of being able to judge exactly where our health is, I actually think, how do you do that? And there's a startup that I've seen, and there's new technologies that I've seen that are actually measuring your health and detecting cancers through pads and tampons for women. And so each month it's actually giving you an indication and a tracker of how your health is. And so it's a non-invasive way of being able to track that. I think about in the future, there's Total Toilet, a company in Japan, which is actually measuring your output and your sequencing your genome every time you go to the toilet. So telling you what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat, and this kind of hyper-personalized world that we're going into. I think that's what helps kind of inspire me, and the purpose behind good health and well-being is that at the moment we've got so many unknowns about how our insides are. And I love that you talk about the psychology. You actually wear it and you show that in the body and the way that you move. And I guess I'm excited about the future of healthcare and how we can solve these problems, but how we can also show up for ourselves so that we can show up for others just through information. And so I will certainly be tuning into what you're doing with information to be able to come to a class and know how my body is actually, what it's going to tell you. It might be quite fascinating. I'm not sure I want to know, but I do want to know.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And so I guess any actions that, as we're starting to wind up a little bit now, I've got some quick fire questions for you, but are there any actions in particular that you think that our listeners should have a look at or should take?
For their own well-being?
For their own well-being, and then any ideas for a bigger impact?
Obviously, they should be doing yoga and Pilates. And in terms of bigger impact, I mean, you've just caught me at a moment in my life where it's something that I'm thinking about a lot and I just don't have answers about. Obviously, for us here in Sydney and in Australia, the next big thing that we've got to do is vote. And, I think it's very easy for people to get disenfranchised with democracies. But again, you need to kind of have a look around the world and see what some of the alternatives are. And I think that kind of sense of disenfranchisement and not even disenfranchisement, that apathy that sometimes people have towards political processes is extremely dangerous. That our democracy is really only as vibrant and strong as we make it. It's very much like our own health. It's how we manage it as individuals that will reflect how strong and transparent and compassionate our democracy is. And I think there must have been a lot of us looking away for a long time because we could do a lot better, right? And I think that it's easy for us to start saying, oh, you should be cleaning up your local beach, or you could be starting a grassroots movement, and 100% agree with all of that. It's amazing. We should not take our eye off keeping our governments accountable, because they do have the power to make decisions that have way bigger effects than us as individuals can have. And we get so caught up in like our own environmental impact and lose track of the fact that 9 companies in the world do the majority of the pollution, and we could change that through legislation. So that might have been a slightly unexpected answer for you, but I'm like, do yoga and Pilates and become actively involved in your political process.
I actually love that. It was definitely not what I was expecting to hear. And I was actually just talking the other day about the fluoride that we have in our water, and how I've got a friend who has a little bit chalky teeth because they grew up on tank water. And I just think, well, actually, yeah, the government decided to put fluoride in the water. So what is it that's actually happening, and what do we need to know, and how do we actually have an impact for the better for our own health and well-being and that of other people as well, to be able to protect them?
Yeah, and I think, we've had an amazing example through COVID of the fact that the majority of people still have huge respect for the scientific and medical community, that overall people will act in the best interests of the majority, and that we can mobilize globally for a greater good. And I find it extraordinary what we've just been through and what we achieved. It's been deeply distressing, and millions of people have died. It's horrendous, but we managed it so much better than we've managed most other threats to our health and well-being.
Very optimistic and very needed in the world right now. And I think definitely focusing on the positive and those affirmations and realizing what we are doing good in our own business and our own world, as well as the impact that we can have, is very refreshing. So some quick fire questions for you, borrowed from Tim Ferriss. Are you ready?
Sure.
What is a gift for under $100 that you've often given?
A brulee gun for the kitchen. Like, you can brulee anything. Amazing.
Oh, vegetables? Ooh.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Gives everything that smoky flavour. Amazing.
What is the last book that you read?
Oh, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
And do you have an unusual habit that people might not know about you?
I really like to sauna. I like to sauna every day if possible. It's not particularly unusual if I was in Scandinavia, but in Australia, it's quite unusual.
Very cool. Lucinda, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd want to share with anyone?
No, I think you've actually left me with a lot of thinking to go and do. So thank you for your insightful questions, Lisa.
That's fantastic. And this podcast is definitely about scaling impact and having these conversations and inspiring actions. So I hope that everyone has written down an action or two that they can go away and they can implement. It's been such a pleasure. Lucinda, thank you again.
Thank you for tuning in to Scaling Impact. Make sure you subscribe to the show in your podcatcher, and we'd be super grateful if you leave us a great review. For more information about Scaling Impact, the Entrepreneurs Organisation, or our work on sustainable innovation, please check out EO Sydney online. We would appreciate if you can take a moment to share the podcast with a friend or a colleague and help build the movement. We hope that what we learn together on Scaling Impact can help us all build a sustainable future for ourselves and our children. See you in the near future.